Yeah, so let's move on. I'm not going to take too much time on the FIDIC contracts, but we do have the CIDB telling us that we can certainly look at the red, yellow, silver, and green contracts. The FIDIC agreements, we do speak to the CIDB speaks to the 99 versions. There is a brand new version. Well, I say brand new, 2017 version. It's a long time since the 99 version. It's a wonderful contract, but I don't see that as having been adopted as yet. So I'm focusing on the 99 versions. And FIDIC always and has always advocated for a balanced approach to the roles and responsibilities of the parties, as well as the allocation of management of risk. And we really see the development in this 2017 version of what FIDIC has advocated for. And we see how over the years we've learned and how we've amended the contract. And it really is a lovely new version of the rainbow suite of contracts, as we call it. So that's what your FIDIC red looks like. Insofar as I've mentioned, the FIDIC red is for, again, recognizing and trying to recognize the balanced risk approach between the parties. The works are for building and engineering works which are designed by the employer. It may include some elements of contractor design, civil, mechanical, electrical, and/or construction works. Rather than having a principal agent, what do we see? We see that these contracts are managed by an engineer who is employed by the employer and is responsible for the administration of the project, like the issuing of instructions, certifying payments, making determinations, and supervision of the work. And some of the engineer's functions may be restricted by the employer. In relation to design using FIDIC red, the employer is responsible for the design of the works, but some design aspects may be provided by the contractor to the extent that the contract allows for it. Insofar as just giving an example, this is just where I've seen it in my experience, is insofar as we use the FIDIC red in a lot of the road construction work. That's where I've used it mainly. Pricing strategies, here we see a bill of quantities again, and overall risk allocation. Here's a good example of where I said to you, the party that is responsible or best suited to bear the risk actually takes on that risk. And FIDIC define it quite nicely to say that the contractor assumes the risks associated with works planning and execution, provision of labor, materials, construction equipment, safety of site operations. That is the party who is best suited to bear these risks, and as such, the contractor bears these risks. What does the employer assume? The employer assumes the risk in relation to providing the site and any information he's collected about the site. Although it can say in your FIDIC agreements that despite us providing the information, the contractor is still responsible for having a look at the information, bearing the information, and conducting their own inspection, and ensuring that the information is available to the contractor to carry out the works. The employer is responsible for extra costs borne by the contractor due to unforeseen risks. And then we see design risks are borne by the party responsible for providing the design. Where is it not suitable? Where the majority of the works has to be designed by the contractor. So that's your FIDIC red. Then we have a look at FIDIC yellow. So FIDIC red is basically your building works, some engineering works, but here we've got FIDIC yellow, which is what we call the plant and design build. And we can see from our cover picture, it says for electrical and mechanical plant and for building and engineering works designed by the contractor. So now we're moving away from a design. You can see there at the third item in the table, we're now looking at a contract where the employer is not responsible for the design, but the contractor is responsible for the design. And insofar as the contractor is responsible for the design, and we can go into this in so much detail, but I'm not going to belabor the point, the design needs to be fit for the purpose and done by the contractor in accordance with the employer's requirements. Overall allocation of risk, similar to what we saw under the red, but the design risks are borne by the party responsible for the design, and in this instance, who do we see as responsible? It is the contractor. So we can always look to not suitable for as one of the factors. You're not going to pick up the FIDIC yellow plant and design build when you as the employer are responsible for the design. It's just not going to work out. And then we have our third contract in what we call the rainbow suite, which is our red, yellow, and silver. And here what we see is an EPC turnkey project. Oh, sorry, I wanted to mention to you that insofar as the Medupi, and as an example, just so you know what we were dealing with, we're talking about, as an example, FIDIC red for our roads, and we constructed the Medupi and the Kusile power plants using FIDIC yellow. Not that that's a huge, I don't know if it was the contract's fault, but we've obviously seen a lot of issues coming out of those two projects. But we'll leave that for another day. FIDIC silver. FIDIC silver is what we call an engineer, procure and construct contract, or a turnkey contract. And when can we use the FIDIC silver agreements? It is to be used where certainty of final price and completion date are so important that the employer is willing to pay an absolute premium to ensure that the agreed final price and date will not be exceeded. So you appreciate that all the risk is borne by the contractor. The contractor has to complete this contract on time, at the cost, and according to the quality that it specifies. And if that doesn't happen, it's the contractor that bears the risk. But what does the employer pay for the contractor assuming all the risk? The employer pays an absolute premium. So we see there that the pricing strategy is a lump sum fixed price contract. Obviously, the design contractor is responsible for the design. And where do we use these kind of contracts? On major turnkey projects, such as process power, private infrastructure projects, where a contractor takes full responsibility for the design and execution. Jumping down to the last point, which is always something which is going to be a telltale sign about whether you could use this contract or not. It is not suitable if the construction works will involve substantial work underground, or dredging work, or work in other areas which tenderers cannot inspect, unless special provisions are provided to account for unforeseen conditions. And I think that makes sense on the basis of everything that I've explained, is if you're going to take on all of this risk, and even though you're going to be paid a lot of money for it, you also take on all the risk. You are not going to take on that risk if you don't know exactly what you're dealing with. And if there's substantial underground work. Whenever we do underground work, dredging work contracts, those sort of things, there is so many elements of the unknown or unforeseen that I would not advise anybody to use your FIDIC silver or your turnkey type agreements for those sort of projects. So before we finish off on FIDIC, just as we saw in the JBCC, where we've got your minor works agreement, or as I'm lovingly using the simple works agreement, FIDIC also has a short form of contract, which FIDIC calls the FIDIC Green Book. And there we can use it for a straightforward, flexible contract, which includes all essential commercial provisions and can be used for all types of engineering and building works. FIDIC recommends that you can use this insofar as what they say is a relatively small capital value, so 7 million rand, again, fairly simple or repetitive work or work of a short duration, 6 months, without the need for specialist subcontractors. Here, rather than an engineer managing the contract on behalf of the employer manages the contract. Design could be by either party. There are multiple pricing strategies available. Overall risk is borne by the employer insofar as the employer bears the risk and liability of design of any part of the works by the employer's personnel or by others for whom the employer is responsible. So to summarize that, we're not going to use the FIDIC Green Book or the short form contract where we are dealing with large engineering and building work, which is complex and of a, excuse me, I'm missing an N there. I did not mean a long duration. I meant a long duration.